we use all sorts of words to describe death and to talk about death and dying. The person is passed. I noticed actually recently, in recent years, that seems to become the way that even in newspapers and on the BBC News they talk about passing, but all sorts of other ways. So he's gone to heaven, he's gone to a better place, they've taken their final journey there, we've popped his clogs, he's snuffed it, all manner of ways. And so I have a thing, I mean, it's quite interesting, it could be quite fun to think together about all the different glorious ways in which you can describe death and dying, and they're often quite funny, but they also can be confusing, and they often are confusing. And when I ask people with a learning disability what is the best word to talk about death or dying, quite a lot of people say dead, and died is the easiest word. And so the important thing is to be absolutely sure that whatever word you use is a word that is understood by the person in the same way. And the only words really that I can think of that where there can be very little ambiguity or confusion about what you mean is actually the word dead. He's dead. They've died. Anything else, you'd be surprised how even what you think is the most straightforward word is open to confusion. So, for example, I was asking somebody, and this is people with a learning disability, once, when I say that somebody's passed, what do you think that means? And they think that I was talking about passing somebody in the street. I've got so many examples. So somebody I can think of was somebody I knew who was terribly excited when he was told that he was going to go on holiday to Devon, because he thought he was going to see his friend there. He said, I'm going to see my friend, I'm going to see so-and-so. I've forgotten the friend's name now, but say it's John for the sake of argument. I'm going to see John in Devon. And it turned out John had died, the friend had died a couple of years ago, and he was a really good friend, and he'd always been told that John had gone to heaven. And so he just misheard it. He thought, John's gone to Devon. Oh, well, he must, that's so John is somewhere where I can go. It's in Devon. So if people living in Devon, you may well be delighted to hear that it sounds like heaven. But it can be confusing. And there's another example where a support worker was talking to somebody with a learning disability about his dad who died. And he sort of said, your dad's in heaven, and didn't realise that at the moment of him pointing upwards, an aeroplane came over. And so ever since then, that young man, whenever there's a plane, he would wave and say, oh, bye, Dad, because he'd connected the word dad's gone to heaven with the actual, physical pointing and the aeroplane going past. So, people can take things very literally, and it really, really can be confusing. There was another person who was convinced that heaven was at Highgate Cemetery, because they'd heard, people say that Granny's gone to heaven, and she'd been to the funeral. She'd seen Granny being buried at Highgate Cemetery, so clearly that is where heaven was, because she knew that's where Granny was. So, you can't ever be 100% sure that somebody really understands your words. And often we use those words because we want to make death less dead. We want to make it sound nicer or friendlier. But really there isn't any way to make death nice or friendlier more than it is. So we can really confuse people. If we say, oh, they've gone to a better place, well, why can't I go? Or, he's lost, or we've lost them, or they've gone on. It really can be very confusing, and it can also be upsetting, because that might make people think, they've gone somewhere and they didn't want to be with me. So to be as clear as possible in your language is really my strong recommendation, and that is really from having listened and talked to many people with a learning disability about death and dying. Now clearly if somebody themselves uses a certain phrase, so you know, we have a colleague here in our team who who refers to death as taking my final journey. And with him, that's fine. That's what I would say, but I wouldn't then use that phrase with somebody else who may be confused by it. So if you're not sure, then talk about, just use the word dead. And even if somebody themselves says, "Oh, my dad's in heaven," you know, I'd be interested to find out from that person what they mean. You know, what does that mean? What is that in heaven? Where are they? What do you mean? So, you know, I would say make your language as straightforward as possible, and if at all possible, avoid all these euphemisms with people with a learning disability. The person is dead, the person has died. These really are the best words.